things because if I prepare too much, I really mess it up terribly.
I think short and sweet, we do the proclamation. And, mention this town, issue a proclamation recognizing you on service with the Sarcasm Regional Board, provided youth Somerville and how 300 years ago. And it is interesting following how they evolved into what they evolved.
What we are today.
Yeah.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have almost 9 o'clock-ish. And I know we always start on time, but we don't have the clock tower here to help us. So if we find our seats. All right, I think we have everybody situated. I want to call our special called council meeting and workshop to order. And first, I just want to say thank you all who have prepared for today. We have with our council, some transition and some new folks. We have a lot of things going on in town. And I think this workshop is going to be extremely important for all of us as we move into 2024. And I just want to thank the staff who really do all the heavy lifting for us. Thank you for preparing and educating us today on where we're going. And with that, a couple housekeeping things. I'm sure everyone knows where the restroom is. If you don't, it's out to the right and to the right. I'm sure everybody knows that Councilman Brown had a birthday yesterday. So we'd like to wish Councilman Brown happy birthday.
I didn't think you could just don't get them mixed up with Joe Biden or Donald Trump.
I don't think,
Right there.
I don't think we'll have a problem with that. And then the last thing that Lenny asked is, because we are live streamed and we don't have enough microphones for everybody, when you do give a report or need to speak for a duration, please go up to the podium beside him. There's a microphone up there. We just want to make sure the folks who could not make it can hear what's going on today. Sure. And with that, I'll turn to the administrator and see if you have any opening words before we get started.
Well, really, I just, as you just said, I want to thank everybody. I know the staff put a lot of time and effort and energy into putting this presentation together. So thank you all. And really, I think the first thing we're going to talk about is just try to give everybody an update on our new public safety complex and where we are. Frank is going to give you a little bit of history, and then he will introduce you to our guests.
I'm sorry, but somebody mind sharing the Wi-Fi password for me so I can get on?
Wi-Fi password.
Defines is names.
Okay, certainly.
And that's all lowercase, I'm assuming.
And Councilman Jackson had a good suggestion that perhaps we should go around the table and introduce ourselves, particularly for our newest member of council. So I will start. I'm Lisa Wallace, and I'm the town administrator.
Outstanding. Russ Touchberry, Mayor.
Kim McGarten Schmidt, council member, District 5.
Aaron Brown, District 1.
Tiffany Johnson Wilson, District 2.
Chris Mikowski, PIO. Wendy Morgan, IT Minister.
Jesse Schuler, planning director.
Brian Dean, Stormwater Management.
Chris Grant, Human Resources Manager.
Frank Neal, Director of Community and Economic Development.
Bob Jackson, District 6.
Richard Waring, District 4.
And last but not least, GW Parker Town Attorney.
That's a great idea, Councilman. Thank you.
Hey, let the,
Yes.
Um,
go ahead, sure, Steve Downing from the book. Barry, thank you.
Great, y'all aware of Deputy Chief Police?
got other-
Bring it on, Sam, please.
Hey, outstanding. Hey. Well done. Basically, to sum that up, dream team, right?
There you go.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. With that, I guess we'll turn it over.
Yes, turn it over to Frank.
I guess we're using the podium. Good morning, everyone. This is Frank Mills, Director of Community Economic Development Program. I just want to give everyone a kind of a quick update, on kind of how we've gotten to this point with Creech and Associates. As you may or may not remember, the mayor and council created and appointed a special public safety facilities committee that was made up of Chairperson Russ Touchberry. We also had Mr. Brown and Mr. Jackson was on that committee. On that committee, also the staff representation of the town administrator, police chief, fire chief. We've met a number of times. I will say I've kind of been the ex officio member since I've come on, so I've participated in the meetings. But as part of that process, we brought in a number, probably 5 or 6 different architecture firms for the committee to review, and in the end, decided to interview 3 firms. And all of them specialize in public safety facilities and government buildings. So it's a very specialized project, and we wanted to make sure we had specialized architects. Throughout that process of the 3 interviews, we had them public interviews. We had that committee was present, but we also probably had about 10 or 15 other folks that were participating and sat back in the back rows and watched the presentations. In the end, we selected Creech and Associates, who's here today to present their findings. And really, one other important factor about Creech and Associates, we hired them about 5 years ago to create a facilities need assessment for the entire town. And basically, they looked at all the facilities we had and looked at our future needs. The reason I say that, 2 points. One is that that's really accelerated this process for us to get us to this point. But 2, it also shows that the methodology is really validating, because their original 5-year assumptions have pretty much played out, except maybe a little bit of the police department, a little bit on the police, but everybody else pretty much on point. So bringing on Creech and Associates, we also have parallel staff has done a number of other things that are important. Number one, with some initial discussion, there's a possibility of us putting a second floor on the existing facility. So before we wasted resources, time, and energy going down that path, we went ahead and hired a structural engineer to basically give us an evaluation of the building. Those findings came back as that it was not possible, primarily because of building codes, size codes, and structural new codes. So that option has basically been taken off the table. Number 2, we've also had the wetlands delineated out there. You're familiar with that project. There's a pond in the rear of the property. There's some concern there may be some wetlands. That has come back as no wetlands. So no wetlands on the property, another important aspect. And finally, Creech and I have met one-on-one with each one of the departments, fire, police, and courts and their staff, one-on-one on a number of occasions to really ensure that all their concerns and all the efforts that we're going through are not in vain. They're all on point with each one of these departments. So now, with that said, I'm gonna hand it over to Creech because they've got exciting information. We've got Rusty Green here with us today. Oh, I'm sorry. I have Brent Green. Rusty is his partner.
Frank, let me clarify something, I'm sorry. Did you say something about no weapons on premises?
Wetlands.
Okay.
That would be.
And Frank, you said no wetlands on the property. Was that getting at the current property or proposed property?
Current property, current existing property, there's a pond in the back,
Okay.
back there. Okay. I can't tell this is on. That better? Very good. Okay, well, thank you for that warm introduction, Frank, and thank you all for allowing me to be here this morning. It's been an exciting process, and we're glad to share our progress with you today. I want to pitch to a couple of things. One is notice that there are lots of draft plans all over this document. We are not completed yet. This is an update, so this is really just kind of sharing where we are in the timeline of this process, which means that nothing that we're going to talk about today is final. This is just, again, information for us to provide so that informed decisions can be made as you guide us moving forward. Okay, so we can go into what really this is sort of our table of contents, and what we're going to talk about is the locations that were identified for study, what we found with each of them. I'll probably move a little bit more briskly through that portion, and then we'll get to the fun part, which is the solutions that were identified for each of these properties. So again, we sort of started, we were here in January of 19, as Frank alluded to, happy to be back to update the 5-year projections. This time the scope was narrowed specifically to the fire department, the police department, and the municipal courts. And so we really focused in on those three aspects. And there were really sort of two high-level options that we considered. One was, does the fire administration and Fire Station 1 need to be relocated such that municipal courts and police could continue to exist on the existing site? That was option one. The other option that we were asked to consider is it feasible to combine all three functions on the same site? Which of course then would allow for sort of this public safety complex to be realized in truest form with all three functions on the same property. So with those two drivers, we were assigned a series of sites to analyze. We were going to share with you our findings on each of them. So here are the 4 sites, and they are at relative scale to each other, just to give you an idea of their size. The site on the far left, which we call options A1 and A2, is the intersection of the Berlin G. Myers Parkway and East 6 South Street. It is currently a park and ride lot and has, sort of a nice presence along the parkway. The second site we were asked to look at is along West Richardson, it's part of the Woodlands development. And that was the number 2 site that we were looking at. The third site we refer to is Pine Street. It is sort of across the corner from the existing property where the public safety complex is. It's actually 2 parcels that were combined. And then, of course, the existing site itself on the 2nd Street that you all are all familiar with, where the existing Fire Station 1 admin and police station are located. So those were the 4 sites. Okay? And that was our charge, was to see what can we do with these 4 sites. So site 1, and again, we'll kind of go through these a little more quickly. These are the development parameters, property lines, the area. I will say that the town has been very wise on zoning and jurisdiction on these properties. They're all zoned public land, which gives us the flexibility to develop them as needed per these specific public safety uses. So this was site 1. Site A, I guess I should say. Site B, again, Woodlands at its own scale. I will call attention that there is a dark swath that runs through the middle of that property, which you may or may not be able to see based on that graphic. At this point, we don't have specific surveys on each of these properties, so we're reliant upon GIS information to guide us, and which is usually very accurate. The GIS on this particular site indicated that a large portion of it would be designated as wetlands. And you can, I hope, see that sort of darker swath that runs through the center of the site. So right out of the gate, that tells us, okay, well, there's going to be some additional development constraints relative to that property. Okay. If you go to the next one, site option C, which again was those 2 parcels we combined, calling the Pine Street, North Pine Street site. Similar situation. If you see the light versus the dark, and I hope that you're able to discern that graphically, there's basically a swath down the middle of the site that is delineated or is designated on GIS as wetlands, which again tells us, okay, sure, yes, can we develop it, but there's going to be additional costs and challenges related to that type of effort. So at this kind of high level feasibility, we would say, do we have other options besides going down this path? Okay. And then the existing site.
And, you know, this one is attractive for lots of reasons. It's the location where these services are currently provided. You know, obviously it's land that you own. I think Frank mentioned in our perspective, one of the largest challenges, which was the fact that a portion of the site, if we were to combine functions, was occupied by the retention pond. So knowing that that is not wetlands provides us the opportunity to remove retention pond and handle that with some underground storage, which allows us to gain that property area back. And you'll see in a few moments why that's probably an important aspect relative to making these functions successful on this particular site. So no environmental constraints that we're aware of on this site after we've had the wetlands designated as not delineated. Okay. Now we're going to move into the solutions part. So hopefully this is a little bit more fun. And really what this turns into, and I wanted to pause here and mention, I think you all might have received, some of you received copies of our space needs assessment. Frank mentioned some one-on-one time that we spent with each department, and that's related to the assessments for their needs for space. So we did that 5 years ago. We met with each team and did updates to make sure that we were still on track. And so those sizes are what dictates these templates and footprints that we're seeing today in the plan. So this is one option that we looked at, and it's on the option A. So we call this A1, which is on the Berlin-Myers track. And there was some discussion on whether or not the apron for egress wanted to exit onto Berlin G. Myers. And so we said, well, is it feasible to exit onto East 6 South Street, primary egress, with a sort of rear entrance on Gum? And you know, you can see there that the diagram is feasible. There are some development standards related to fire stations that we have to adhere to. There are certain apron dimensions that have to be held on the front, on the rear of the facility to allow for that full egress for those large vehicles to move through the facility. And of course, response times and all of those items are a topic for that site development as well. So in this scenario, you would have those pull-through bays that would egress onto East 6 South. You would enter the lot from Gum. There will be a sort of secure rear area with staff parking, and there will be some public parking available out on the front of the property. This is a feasible site development. There are not wetlands on this site, but to the plan right, you will see a slightly darker area. There is a little bit of floodplain on this site, but it's out of the development area, and we feel like we can accomplish this development without having to mitigate that particular environmental constraint. So there's around 29 spaces required, staff spaces required 15. You know, public spaces, we have to have a few public spaces for folks to visit. So we're able to meet the parking count within the development on this property. So this would work, but I think the fire folks will tell you that the least amount of turns in our flow and access is always better. And so we wanted to see, is there a better option for this particular site? And so the next slide is option A2, which is where we took the facility and rotated it 90 degrees so that it actually fronts the parkway. And I think from an inflow and outflow perspective, coming in straight off Gum, pulling straight into the bays and straight back out is an advantage relative to response times and just vehicular flow. That also puts the building in a position where it fronts the parkway. So it gives it a little bit more architectural presence and identity as one of your new civic buildings, you know, in town. We can certainly accommodate the staff parking, and this solution also allows for a little bit more public parking, you know, over on the East 6 South Street side of the property. So from our perspective, we looked at two different options for Fire Station 1 and fire administration to be relocated on this property. And we found that both of these at this level of analysis were viable. Okay. So then, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to go ahead and look at the other sites and give them the same due diligence. And so we took that fire footprint and we dropped it on top of the property at scale. And you can kind of see visually, without mitigating wetlands, we were not going to be able to accomplish this with the building itself. Well, we'll start with Richardson on the left. The building itself won't even fit on the property without being in the wetlands. So you're absolutely mitigating there. And then on the Pine Street site, yes, we could actually wedge the building in and still maintain. That's okay. We could get the buildings in and stay out of that wetland constraint, even if we accessed off of Cedar or Pine, but getting the drive aisles and all the other aspects that are that are part of the site development are going to mitigate wetlands. And so from that perspective, we said it probably at this point doesn't make much sense to invest in those any further, because we know out of the gate we're going to encumber more cost to develop those sites. That can be a redirect, but that was where we landed at that point in the study. Okay. So now we're going to look at a series of options on the existing site. And I think this is where there's going to be some variables that we discuss, but I think they all sort of land in a similar place. Two things that I'll mention out of the gate. We've already talked about the retention pond and the ability to remove that. You also have a transmission tower on that property. And there are some rules regarding how close to that we can build. It has an access easement also, which is the current existing road that runs out beside the fire station. It's sort of in the middle of the site. So in order to accomplish this development, we are obviously staying out of what is identified as that fall protection zone for the tower, which is represented by that white dotted line, which is that circle around the tower. So we're not building anywhere inside of that zone. The other thing we're proposing is to flip the easement access to the planned north edge of the property. We're still providing access to the tower, all of those same things. It's just we're moving it out of the center of the site so that we can get more buildable area along the main street there. And so those are the two kind of drivers relative to this site. Otherwise, it's already active, it's already developed, and so you sort of know what the other constraints are. Go back to that one, please, ma'am. Thank you. So in this is the option where we have decided, okay, we're going to move Fire Station 1 and Fire Administration off the property, which means that the other two functions would reside here. So in this option, you can see that there is a single-story municipal court that meets program. There is a 3-story police facility that meets program, and those would be separate buildings. In this instance, our tagline is architecture of place. So when we have an opportunity to discuss campus, we're always trying to think about how buildings relate to each other, how they relate to their exterior, how can we create space on campus. So we thought about this sort of public plaza that could exist between the two. And then perhaps that affords the opportunity for staff and public to utilize that space when you're outside of primary functions in the building. When you have multiple buildings on the campus, each one has to have its fairly clearly identified entrances. We don't want, of course, people going to the police department and vice versa. And so those squares with X's on them are generic graphic representation of here's the entrance, and we'll define that architecturally as we move forward. So you'll also notice at the back of the property, there's a small rectangular building. The police has a fleet and some covered storage and some larger vehicles that need to be stored inside. And it's a lesser price point than the rest of the facility. So we pull those out and we put them as kind of a support facility in the rear of the property to manage costs and to put them out near the vehicular storage. You'll notice where that pond was in the previous iterations we've now covered with parking, because that is really what we have a need for when you combine these facilities on one site. And the other aspect that I'll talk about, and we'll see a graphic of it on coming slides, is that the courts has about 150 car load on heavy docket days. And so the only way, and we talked about this 5 years ago, the only way to solve that is with some structured parking across the street on the parcel that is also owned by the town. And so I have a solution for that. You'll see listed down there. We are having around, 144 and 32. I have 174 space garage planned for this development, which will be on the parcel across the street. And again, we'll look at a graphic for that in just a moment. So this is the solution where fire moves off and we have courts and police on this site. Very doable. Plenty of room, and certainly something that we feel very comfortable about. Okay. Y'all are quiet, so I'm gonna keep going. All right. So then the challenge was, okay, now let's see if we can get them all on the same site. And this was more of a challenge, but we felt like we landed on a couple of things that were viable. All the things that I've mentioned prior to on the development constraints still apply to this to this design. One of the things about one of the aspects that makes this place interesting is you sort of have this intersection of pine coming down that creates this axis. And so we thought, wouldn't it be interesting if kind of one of the main building entrances could be right on that? So it's just sort of the termination as you're coming down that street. And what if that was the courts building? So in this option, we are combining police and courts. Even though they are separate facilities and will be separated, they basically would read as one mass with two separate entrances. And you ask us, why would we do that? One of them is site size and just the development area that we have to work in. The other one I will share is that there are some programmatic overlaps relative to Sallyport, relative to temporary holding, preparation for court proceedings that can be shared. And so there's some synergy in having those two facilities in proximity so that we can design them to share that type of facility. So you can see that as police having its own completely separate entrance, court separate entrance. And then the police map, that building would be 3 stories in its entirety. So you would see that as a 3-story facility that courts occupy, sort of the first floor of one section. And then the separate building for fleet and all the other covered vehicle stands, as we've discussed prior to. The difference on this one is that on the bottom half of the site, we've located Fire Station 1 and admin. We've looked at 2 different options for how to do that. One option is to rotate the bays behind so that the pull through happens through the rear of the site, and then you exit back out onto East or West 2nd North. And that puts the fire admin and the house up front on the street. That works, but it doesn't provide the best flow for the vehicles coming through the back, coming off of the rear street and accessing all of the bays. And so this was one option that we looked at, but we asked ourselves, can we make access for the bays a little bit better and still accomplish all of these same goals? Which led us to this option. And again, y'all, the theme here is constant. It's we want to push the buildings and the development up closer to the road to allow for that service yard that we need in the rear for all of this access to happen and parking. So what we've done here is we've pushed basically everything up to the road, and it would allow for free egress to all 4 bays for the fire station, and that same type of access out onto the main street. So these are all developments that are viable. We're looking at sort of smaller options here. I think I have one more that I want to share with you, because ultimately, if I'm the fire department, I would always rather have my bays fronting the street as opposed to off of the side. And so we can take this same design and rotate the apparatus bays so that they front West 2nd North Street. And so again, you can still come in off of the rear, you can make your way through, you have enough room to queue in, and you're within the bays and ready for your response time. In this idea, the courts building again sort of occupies that dead axis coming down Pine Street there. So you're coming down, you have sort of this moment that happens here. And then the police department again shares that facility and really has its main entrance slightly to the right. And then it would be a 3-story mass, sort of all encompassing. In this option, we showed the retention pond as it was, just as a fun thing, because it's like you can see now that I've showed you the other development, I don't think we could build enough deck across the street, actually, if we didn't have the ability to park in that location. Okay. I will also say, yes, here, perfect. So here's the graphic for said parking garage. Y'all are lucky. The site module is perfect for precast, which is the most cost-effective methodology for building a garage. You know, there's sort of a magic dimension to make that work. You have it, so that's beneficial. If we only do police and courts on this site, you need 1 less level of garage than you would if we brought fire to this site. Also, it's purely parking numbers. It's just the number of staff we would have on site. One of the things that we talked about here is we could also have segregated parking on the lower level of this garage for secure parking, for police, for fire, for staff. They could have a separate entrance off of Pine, and the public could come in, you know, off of West 2nd North and enter up a level. So there's certainly ways that we can even separate parking within the deck, but unfortunately, to meet the parking requirements, that is required as part of this development. Okay. Okay, so let's take a deep breath. That's sort of all the options that we were looking at. And again, remember, I want to share with you, and I'll reiterate something I said a moment ago. This is all still in progress. So we may come away from today and have some other options to look at, some of which we've been discussing sort of as we prepared for today. But we wanted to put some numbers to this development so that we were able to begin to understand the type of investment that we're speaking to. I'm going to run through the way that these estimates are structured. You guys can ask as many questions as you so choose. But effectively on the left is if we built 2 separate sites. So that idea where we were going to build all on that site on the Berlin G, take fire admin and fire station 1 out there and do everything else on the property. And the number on the right is if we did it all on one site. Wow, they're about the same number, right? And so that was sort of interesting to me. We said, why is that? Before I get into the detail. Well, when you're building 2 sites, you have more site work. When you're building more people at the public safety site, you have more parking deck. So literally it's site work to another level of garage. And if you look at the math, it's almost exactly the number. So that's really the delta between the two, and why they are so similar relative to costs. So in each of these projects, we have a site work number. And by the way, we have a professional cost estimator, Harris Cost, who has worked in this region for 30 years and has his finger on the pulse of what is happening in the market. So that is where the cost estimate numbers come from. This is a professional who does this as his primary business. So we have a number for site work development. The numbers for site work development include a range of things, like preparing the site, like the retention ponds. Like pretty much every time we touch a project in this area, we end up finding some dirt that needs to be removed. So we've just begun to account for 2 feet of removal of dirt and replacing with structural fill. So there are some assumptions baked into these estimates, because at this point we need to be conservative. There are some things still that we don't know. We want to make sure that we're accounting for that. So those are those items that make up site work. And then of course, landscaping, grading, all of the other things that go with that. The buildings are priced at a per square foot ratio at this point, because all we have is sort of their size and their program. And these are accurate based on what you see in the region. So unfortunately, fire stations are coming in right around $400 a square foot. And frankly, by the time you add the soft costs, it's higher than that. And so that's what the metrics are that are generating those subtotal costs. So you hit that first line, and then you have general requirements and bonds. You have the general contractor fee. That's the cost of putting the work in place. That's what any contractor is going to charge you to build the project. That's their money. Under the GC fee, we have a line called design and market contingency. That is a 10% contingency that we carry at this phase, because all we have is what we have. And we need to design some more things before we have a more clear understanding of what the cost is. Anytime we do things at advanced planning level, we hold a 10% contingency. Underneath of that, you will see something called the Sustainable Design Standard. That is a topic that is yet to be defined. But what we are learning as most of our communities are reaching sort of these goals for carbon neutrality, that we at least want to provide for some funds and infrastructure, even if it's not done on day one, to allow for some type of offset relative to solar or whatever a sustainable initiative might be. I will also let you all know that there are grants available, some pretty aggressive grants right now relative to PV arrays. And so you could even pair that money with a grant and perhaps accomplish something even greater, if that is an initiative that council is interested in. But we have it in there, and of course, we can obviously take it out. And the last line underneath of that detail is escalation. It's a word that none of us like to speak of. Thankfully, the percentage of escalation has come down, but it still is increasing at a relatively consistent rate. And so the longer we wait to build something, we have to account for the fact that the market will increase by the time that project is built. This anticipates a 2025 Q1 bid, which would basically mean if we were designing in 2024, we would be ready for a bid in 2025 first quarter. And that's, the escalation is based on the time when the project is bid, because that's when effectively its value is established. Okay. So that's what those bucket of monies are below the construction number. And I will tell you that the contractor general requirements, bonds, insurance, and GC fee are very fair based on what we see in this region. I was sharing with them in other locations. We see 13s and 14s in that column. So be thankful that we're here and that it's a much more reasonable market to build in. And all of those things together generate a construction cost. And then we have this line at the bottom that is called soft costs. And you say, well, what is that? You just keep adding money to the line items, right? So soft costs are costs that you're going to incur that are outside of the construction budget. You're going to buy, I would assume, furniture, fixtures, AV, equipment, security, those type of elements that we need to make the facility finished and complete. We hold a percentage in soft costs to account for that. There are going to be some design fees associated with the project, and a percentage of it is accounted for that. There is also going to be some things you are required to provide during construction that code requires. It's called third-party inspections, structural testing, what people will have to come out and verify welds are done correctly, test the veracity of your concrete. And unfortunately, those are things that code requires that you have to hire consultants to pay for. So that's what's in that 25% of soft costs, sort of costs outside of the project. And all those things together, I will point out the property acquisition number is 0. That's a wonderful thing, because if you were buying property, we'd be doing, we'd be having another line item to discuss. So that's one of the benefits of what we're looking at now, is the fact that at least we're not spending money for land, okay? So you will see, and forgive me, is that 13,944 for the all-in number for the Fire Station 1, Fire Administration, and then the municipal court and police number. And if you add those two together, you're at that 76,401, 423. That's a big number, and that's why I say our work here is not done, because, you know, one of the things that we can do, if it's a takeaway for us, is to go back to the table and say, what are some other options? I will tell you that one of the guiding principles for this study was to say all new construction. So that is something that we are providing here, and I wanted just to make that a point as we're discussing this as well. So I'll be happy to run through the other two estimates with you in that same exact detail, but I've gone through one of them with you, and I don't want to bore you to death with all of these numbers, but that's the cadence for how the costs are generated. It is the site cost. I will point out that the site cost on the existing site is much larger than the site cost on East Berlin. I mean, on the Berlin Parkway. You know why? It's because of scale. There's much more property, because we have a parking deck site also across the street that we're having to deal with. We're going to put an underground detention system and replace that pond. That's a $500,000 line item. So we are spending money to make that site suitable to put all three of those functions on that property. But you're also saving money because you're not buying land. Is that enough detail on this, y'all? We can go through this at any level of detail that you all choose. I just don't want to wash over.
I think that's an exceptional start, and appreciate the thoroughness. Before I open it up, kind of open the floor for questions and comments. I want to say, as the chair of the Public Safety Facilities Committee, a couple overarching thoughts that maybe challenge us a little bit. One of those is, I believe our facility has been inadequate for our town for the last 20-ish years. We've recognized that as a town. However, we continue to kick the can down the road. And I think your point about the cost escalation of construction is extremely important. It needs to be in the forefront of our minds. So I want to think about that. Number two, we have first-class police and fire service folks who work here each and every day, and they have a culture of excellence. And I think their facilities should reflect that same culture of excellence. That doesn't mean the chiefs get Taj Mahals. We want to be reasonable and good stewards of the funds entrusted in us. However, it needs to be reflective of the excellence of the men and women who serve our town. And I want us to challenge us to make sure that is done. And then, you know, the third thing is, we are the 7th largest municipality in the state. And I believe that our facilities should be reflective of that as well. And kicking the can down the road leads me to, I guess, mid-year budget last year, or the budget meetings, when Chief Waring was still the fire chief. He made a very good point that I think we all need to think about. We do a lot of talking and a lot of planning as a body and as a town for decades, but we have failed to execute. And I challenge us, as we ask questions, ask the tough questions, be creative, but I want to challenge us to execute because the time is now. It's only going to get more costly in the future, and it may disrupt our ability to serve our citizens the way they expect it. So with that, I'll open the floor for questions.
I think just thank you for not doing any more, because all the numbers run together. At least I know what this one is. I like the Berlin G site, always have, decades ago. And I think the two things on the sites that we have, one, the Berlin G site will give the fire department run from all edges of the town. Where it is now, served the town when it was the historic district. Now they've got a 3 or 4 minute run just to get to the Berlin G. The other thing is, as we build these, money allowed, I'd like to see us go the ability to build up afterwards. And I think we may want that extra story on the parking garage regardless, even if we just plan for it for the future. Parking is now and will always be a problem in some of them. And with the number of threats we've had to the police department, I think that perimeter should be able to be secured with push of a button.
The facilities were, I did not point that out specifically, but each one does have a secure perimeter on it with gates and access, so that's a great point. And we also have low, secure planter walls across the front that provide force protection in a more subtle way than bollards do. But thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Mayor, thank you for the comments that you know, you alluded to the fact that we have been pushing this down the road for quite a while. This plan's been on the agenda, I think, since back in maybe 2017, 18, when it was first brought to staff to come up with an idea. And thank you guys for continuing to hang in with us to come up with another good plan. The numbers sure have gone up over the years as we've watched them go up, and that is disappointing. But couple questions and something I don't know if we took into account. I assume if we all stayed on the same spot, there'd be a demo. We're going to have to clear the site. Have we taken into account any temporary facilities and whatnot as far as costs are concerned with that?
I think that's a really good point. And I think once we determine the phasing of that, we'll have a better finger on that. But there is some money in the contingency that could allow for, yes, temporary relocation. And it varies depending on department, clearly. So I think we have something in there for it, but we need some more information on that to make sure it's correct.
Okay. And then for the second site going out to, you know, the option one, I guess, as far as going further, I guess you'll look at response times and whatnot.
We do. We played around with it a little bit. That is our biggest concern with that site is the backside of that district going towards like the Brownsville area. That's where we'll have a longer response time there. But everywhere else would be great. It's something that we are going to play around with a little bit more to see what response times would be. But that's truthfully that would be an amazing option.
I think 3 facilities on that one site is packing a lot on there. I don't know if it's going to alleviate the problem that we have now. So that's just you know, kind of a concern. I've been going back and forth with this over the past couple of weeks whenever I met with Frank, and but yeah, I'm leaning more towards the Berlin G side. Not that I want to get away from the police, but
That's more like an option with anything, so.
exactly. But yeah, I do think it would be. We're going on our side. We're going to do some more digging in and see what's the best for the fire side. So.
And remember, we also have an option. We have a fire location analysis consultant who does exactly that. And if we opt for that, he can run the analysis on that and give you all of that information as well. That's an option if you choose to.
Thanks, Benny. I agree with you 100%. I think that site would get pretty crowded. You know, it's with three people over there.
I was looking at the site and I was like, big trucks. I mean, that's not it's be pretty tough. I think that it would. I wouldn't want to regret it after we made the decision. So there really isn't a lot of room for space for being outside or anything like that. So it would be.
And I was surprised that the costs were so even. I mean, I think it's important for us to do that exercise. Sure.
I guess that does even leave the top 10 on the table, with the fact that it is basically the same cost, that we might even come out better if we were to find a better piece of property that was satisfied, that, you know, after the analysis is run for response time purposes, that, you know, we could still have an option for another site if it's still economically feasible to do so. To make sure we're getting our, you know, we're going to put the money into the fire station that we're talking about, the police station for, just to make sure we're still providing the adequate response and to citizens. Yes, that's all right.
We've been working on this for a while. I sat where you sat last year. I just want to credit council for the 4 thing. We sat here last year with a time range of 2023 getting the Dominion property. And we were able to secure that by December. We had it out till March of of this year, and we already secured it, we've been in it. I think it was our 22 to 23, but here we are now, we're actually in the talking points of this. So to your first point, there is a way that we can work with the fire department with the Dominion property. And what we'd like to do and propose, if possible, is during this relocation demo phase, the covered parking we have for the apparatus, we have our vehicles, we can put apparatus there, or the old fire department behind it, we can put apparatus in it coming out the back, and we can go out the side gate on the Pine Street to respond from there. And then basically what we're looking at, that entire parking lot on the rear Dominion property is unused, is becoming, I don't want to use the FEMA city or the tent city concept, but basically when you see the sheriff's office over on 78 next to the coroner's office, they have a trailer city for the detectives. So basically we put trailers for housing for the fire department. Obviously our dispatch center we moved where they are temporarily, which we could do. And then our detectives and whatnot, we could use that entire footprint of property to hold over until this project is done, I believe. So I just wanted to, we put a lot of thought into that. We're both can cohabitate on the same piece of property.
Very good. Right, yeah, that's another.
Until we sell it, yes.
Yeah, another avenue we have.
Yeah, and I think with Maple Street coming online, we're gonna need another fire station out there regardless. So,
Going towards, yeah.
Yeah. That's where it's all going.
Councilwoman Johnson.
What is the total usable land size on the Berlin site versus the current site? That's my first question.
Can we speak back to those slides, please? No, that's right. Way back. Yeah, the one with all four of them, please, yeah. So the Berlin site is, what is it, 133.9 square feet, and the existing is 600 and something. So it's basically 3 times or 4 times the size.
Which one is the?
I'm saying the Berlin G, I believe, is 133, I'm trying to read the number, 1,000 square feet, and then the number over the site option D is 6, and I'm just trying to remember, 634, 644. Thank you.
What is your procurement process through this? The $76 million, I know they were using your estimated project cost from your professional sources, but throughout this process, what will be your procurement process in obtaining builders and such?
Oh, okay, that's a fantastic segue. And that is something else that that we wanted to speak about today. Is now the right time for that?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Well, hold on, if that was
Oh.
another topic that we were going to talk about, we may want to make sure the questions are answered where we are now before we move on.
Yes.
So I have something to say to that, and we'll get to that in just a moment, if that's all right.
Okay, sure. The municipal court, you had that as 1 story, is that right? And then you mentioned, I think you mentioned there was a possibility for underground, did I hear you correctly? Underground storage at the pond site?
Yes.
I didn't see that on the plan. Did I miss that?
Well, and that's because it's below that parking lot that we were showing where the pond was. So the idea being that now that we know the pond isn't wetlands, in order to get that area back, we put a device below ground that does the same thing as the pond did.
Okay.
And so no, I could have drawn a dotted line or something and showed you like where it would basically be under where the pond is. I will tell you that we would not put buildings on that. Because from a maintenance standpoint, long-term loading, you wouldn't do that, but you can park on it, and that's done. They're often located in parking lots, so that's certainly typical.
All the other sites, A through C, we would have to purchase those sites, is that correct?
Not A. Right, A is owned. The A is the current park and ride site. The Berlin G site is owned. The other 2 sites, Woodlands and what?
Woodlands.
Oh, well, Woodlands too. So I'm sorry, Pine is the only one that would have to be purchased.
And in your cost estimate for the other site,
Did you put in there the purchase cost?
For the land.
We did not even run estimates on those 2 properties because through the funnel, we sort of deemed them less viable. But if you all were interested in that, we would include, you know, a number for mitigating the wetlands. And obviously your escalation is going to go up because that's a year timeline, often to manage the core process for that. So yes, we could tell you what that is, but I would feel pretty comfortable saying it's going to be a more expensive endeavor.
And you had parking in the garage, but you also had it in the back, in the rear of the lot. But there was another drawing where you had, some parking behind the fire station, it looked like. And you didn't in the others. That was an optional design.
It is. When we do these, we always look at multiple options. Most effective way to gain the program and the most amount of space. So sure, when we turn the bays to the side, it consumed the property to where we can only parallel park back there. So parking opportunities. I hope I'm answering your question.
You are. On the Berlin site, you had egress coming out on South Home Street, I believe.
One of the options, yes.
Okay, and that is close to the residential area. Is there any plans for sound, anything for the additional traffic that's gonna be caused in that residential area coming out on South Home right there?
That's an interesting point. I will say that we did have discussions relative to stacking that the high school experiences in that area as a constraint. And I think the principal was certainly willing to mitigate that by changing the way that vehicles are stacking in that area. One of the reasons that we like egress onto Berlin G as opposed to Gum is because I think it mitigates what you just said, which is some congestion that can happen getting out and getting to that intersection versus having access to a main artery right out of the door. That's my opinion on that.
I personally like the existing site just because I feel like it takes it a little bit out of the residential district versus the Berlin site with Southtown right there. I can see residents not being so happy with that. But if it doesn't work as well, or if police and fire doesn't feel it works as well, that's what matters most because they're going to be utilizing the space. So with that, are there other design options on the existing site that would work for fire that would maybe it would fit a little bit better to their specification?
You can certainly pursue additional options for all three on the property. I will say that the big driver of that is the back of house and the vehicular access. And so one of the things that we talked about, working up to this meeting is there some hybrid scenario where we look at phasing and sort of keeping parts of buildings. And so there are other solutions that we can look at that probably would require renovation of facilities in lieu of them all being new construction. So sure, there's always other ways to skin the cat, but I think that our what we're trying to do is look through it with the lens of efficiency and saying we have X number of surface parking we need secure behind. We have this area to build in sort of along the street that allows for that access vehicular to happen in the rear. And unfortunately, what that means is that we have parking deck across the street. So sure, we can look at, I think we talked about, do you flip the fire station to the top side of the site, right? Where we move the easement access to, and then try and do the other two on the bottom half of the site. Sure, they're certainly, and that's why I say everything is in draft. If that's a comment from today, then we'll take that as a to-go item, and then we'll go back and look at another option for that.
Did you take into account any LEED building credits or anything like that?
Yeah, that sustainable design credit we had originally higher because not knowing where your temperature was relative to sustainable initiatives. I will tell you that it used to be that you can get a LEED certified kind of base level certification building without too much of a premium. That was in the LEED 2 versions ago. And that is not necessarily the case anymore. Some of those constraints have become more aggressive and as a result, more costly. So if you said you wanted a LEED gold building, that number would be 10%. So just to give you a sort of a metric on that.
Do you currently have the handicap parking being in the garage?
No, ma'am, that would be handled on the existing site by surface, the angled street front angled parking. And with the numbers suggest that we can get all of them right there at the access point, which would be beneficial for multiple reasons.
I think that's it for now.
Absolutely.
More, but I will move on.
Thank you.
I have a question, for building all three things there. Any of those buildings, I couldn't tell, are they two-story or is that all one?
Yeah, so the court, in the one option where it's just courts and police, that could be done as a one-story building. We actually don't want to stack that one if we can help it, just from a program standpoint. The police building was always envisioned as 3 stories. That's the only way we can accomplish that amount of square.
Three.
3, yes, ma'am, which is the maximum we're allowed on that site. per zoning, I believe. So we use that and the square footage we have to find the box that we need to accomplish the square footage.
Why did you said for a program standpoint, you did not want to make the municipal building 2-story? Why is that?
I can speak to this, just the way that the spaces flow, but we have public entrance. The way those buildings are zoned in a way that is very specific in 3 different categories. You have a public area, you have the court zone, and you have a secure zone at the rear. And once you get into stacking those, it exacerbates the circulation. And when you have only the 2 courtrooms that we're planning, plus a bond room, it doesn't make much sense from a flow perspective to have that on 2 floors. That's the only reason. Could it be 2 stories? Certainly. We could put the administrative component separate from the actual courtrooms. It just, when we're doing things like this, we try and think of what's ideal. And in our courtroom diagrams, I think we would prefer to have all that on the same level, just again, to make that flow the way that we would like for it to.
And would you say that, Chief, what is your take on that? I mean, what you've experienced, yes, 1 floor versus 2.
Well, I mean, obviously we're have to build up, because of the future. I mean, that's what we're looking at here is the future, not now. We're already here now. But, I even was thinking about even the courthouse. You know, you have the first floor courthouse, even if you have the 2nd floor, maybe be part of the police department, there's no access down to the bottom floor to the court, but that they could use that as a platform, if you will, for another part of the facility to cut down on however you're building or you're designing what you're doing. But certainly it doesn't bother me a bit. I mean, I like having them close by. I think it's a hindrance having them so far away. I think it was a good idea 12 years ago. But I think for security purposes, the flow of prisoners, obviously we don't have as many coming in for in-person bond hearings. But I think for the safety of the court and their administration and what they have going on, and just having everybody meet right there is very good. But I think there needs to be a clear delineation between the police and the court. They are not the same. They're not they don't even cohabitate. But having a clear, we can't go down the stairs into the court. We have to go around through and come through with, you know, a purposeful entrance through the side border for some secure entryway, if you will, the way the old court was.
And so to that point, clearly the court could live on 2 separate floors, right? I think that from our perspective, we like to keep the public interaction on the ground floor, and that's going to be the courtrooms, and that flow we would want to be on the 1st floor. The other spaces could move vertically in the building.
If you put the judge's office or administrative offices upstairs above this before, it might make fire feel like they have a little bit more room. Maybe possibly if you're able to stretch the property a little bit.
Landing road the way it is, I think we need all the buildings to be able to go up. There is no going out anymore as we see.
I completely understand that, and that leverages the value of your land. We just, as we plan for that, you will see a small premium in your buildings because we will size foundations for loads. You know, we have to plan the building now for that later. But that's a good point.
The parking garage also go up. I know you said 3 floors. It's not the same. It's 3 city blocks or 3.
Is it floors or is it a height? 5 feet.
Well, I ask you because you have you talk about 150 cars on a docket now. What's 150 cars? Or what's the docket in 10 years or 15 years?
Now, I mean, with that additional court, it could go up.
Right,
Yeah.
I'm just asking.
No, it's
Not now, but like Bob was talking about, the ability if they needed you to go to a 4th deck. Obviously, parking is a premium, and they could use that for the festival. Obviously, 2 through 4, 2 through 3. You know, could be used for parking for Thursday. They also have going on. People walk 3-4 blocks for that. So
That's a really good
especially
point.
with them moving, what we're gonna talk about later, Main Street down towards down the road north of things.
Yeah, because we're already talking about building a parking garage something down that level. Why build another foundation?
Couldn't agree more. No, that'll make total financial sense. I don't know if it's height restriction or number of floors.
Let me investigate that and get back to you on that. Yes,
Well, I mean, it's technically zone public land, so y'all can do whatever you want.
that's kind of why I love the public land zoning is excellent.
We just had to approve it, right?
Yeah, per council approval.
All right, did we have all of the questions answered about the needs assessment and the consideration of sites?
I have just one, sorry, going back to the Berlin G site, where you had the apparatus, egress on Berlin G. That's a pretty nasty curve right there, Frank talked about that.
Okay.
We would definitely need some sort of traffic signal or something like that
Oh,
there, just to, I don't know if that was in the plans, but, that curve, no one does 45 on Berlin G.
Correct, because it's too many lanes.
And, with the size of our trucks, it can cause some issues.
So
That's the only issue.
Would
that I
you
see with it.
prefer that option to the other option while we're having this conversation? I mean, would you prefer to egress onto Gump? Do you feel like that's a
I
better
just like
solution?
the egress coming off of Berlin G, honestly. I just think 'cause when we wind sirens up to go to a response, we're not facing someone's house at that point.
Right.
So it makes a little more sense.
I like the flow better. It was just straight through the side. Yeah.
But yeah, we would definitely need some sort of signal right there.
Do you mind taking us back to that design slide?
Sure, it's,
Sorry.
no, it's fine. Keep going. Maybe the next one. So that was one of them, and then the one more is the one that we were just speaking to, right? So what you were saying is, see, I did good and I was still the whole time. I'm trying to.
Oh, you're good.
You're good, it's back up.
You need to go over there and point something?
I was going to, but I'm not gonna do it now.
Okay.
So what you're saying is plan right of where we're showing, we would need some sort of signalization, just a
Right,
standard
you can see where the
emergency.
curve starts right
Yeah,
there,
that's what it
and
is.
that's they're moving coming off from Third Street.
Okay.
to Sixth.
Well, if y'all, as long as you are willing to discuss that, I feel like, that's something we could probably accomplish. That's kind of standard fare.
I like that, that's just my only
Is that-
concern, is traffic.
Is that a state road?
DOT.
Okay.
And it's controlled access. We spoke with DOT. There is a process to provide that driveway. We'll just have to follow that process. Yeah. Councilman Brown, I believe you had a question.
Well, as a member of the facilities committee, I was thought that when we first got into this, that we would identify these four locations and you would research them and see which ones, bring it to us like we're doing today, and we would look at those and see which ones are most feasible, and also which, make sure that we don't keep kicking it down the road because it's going to cost us more and more and more. So I don't think we need to be looking at new options. I think we need to try to stick with these four and make decisions moving ahead. Because as you know, the longer you wait, the more it costs as far as the 400 per square feet or whatever goes up. So I think we need to move on, and the chairman made a mayor made a very good point. We can't afford to kick it down the road any longer. There's no question that this town is growing fast and one of the fastest growing towns. So we have got to, the quicker we get this done, we're gonna save money for the future. The longer we wait, it's gonna cost us more.
I think that's an extraordinary point, and I would be encouraged if council at the end of all of this discussion today would go ahead and commit to a timeline of when we decide to move forward. at some
Amen.
point in time. So, if that's all we have on the 2A and B, we will move on to the perfect segue from Councilwoman Johnson Wilson.
Yes, timing is everything. There's a slide close to the very end, please, ma'am. We need to get to this one. Okay, so there was a question asked about procurement and delivery, and I'll do my level best to not bore you on this neither. So there's typically three ways that municipalities procure work for construction. And they're in those three columns that you see here on the screen. The column on the left is I'll call it the old school way. It's design, bid, build. The architect works with you all, we design what we want. And on bid day, it's advertised. And you decide, the contractor you're working with is decided based on who shows up with the thinnest envelope in the parking lot that day. So you won't know who you're working with. Who you were working with is based on the low bidder. So that's sort of how you are decided who you're going to be working with for the next year and a half. You won't find out what the real cost is until that time, until those envelopes are opened on that bid day. Pricing is just like we would run all along, like we've done here. We'll be working with a professional estimator.
I will tell you that just from a relationship standpoint, it just creates a more adversarial pathway. It's the contractor against the architect, and it's just this whole dynamic. Now, I will also tell you all in this room that we are delivering projects like that right now as well. So it is certainly something that can be done. So that's one way. That's design, bid, build. That's the column on the left. The column in the middle is construction management at risk, which is a delivery method that's been more prevalent over the last 10 to 15 years. I'm going to come back to that one. And the column on the right is design build. That is a relatively new municipal endeavor that really has taken prevalence over the last 5 years. Design build is when we work for the contractor. So you all would have one contract. It would be with the contractor, and the architect and your design team works for the contractor. So obviously we're keeping your thoughts in our forefront, but at the end of the day, they tell us what to do, and we're sort of accountable to them. So from our perspective, that doesn't put us in the absolute best place to serve you. But as I just mentioned, we're delivering, just like design bid build, we are also delivering jobs in the design build market. Like I have 3 civic projects, one of which was a 60,000 square foot building that we have in construction. So that is happening prevalently as well. But I highlighted the middle column because I'd like to spend the time there if I could, because one of the CM at risk, which is the acronym for construction manager at risk, is a hybrid. It's sort of the middle ground between both of those. And it really seems to be the most beneficial, in our opinion, in how to deliver projects. We were selected twice, actually, if I think about it, once in 2019 and luckily once again. And you all had a chance to interview people and speak to them and find out if your personalities match. If you go down the CM at risk process, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to interview contractors up front, and you can have submission. They're going to submit qualifications. You can meet with them and find out if this is someone that you want to work with for the next year and a half. So there's that process. You get to choose as opposed to it being chosen for you. They will provide cost all the way through based on their subs. So they're going out to their subcontractors that they work with, tried and true. So the pricing is a little bit more real market. It's a little bit more, hey, if I was building this today or 6 months from now, this is what I would charge you. They provide constructability reviews. They're a part of your team. Someone asked us when we were doing the interview the last time here, what's the one where everybody works together as a team? That's this one, the construction management at risk tactic. And I think this process as a whole is not adversarial. We're all working together on a common goal. And again, I think one of the things that people try and trot out there is, well, the pricing is not transparent. I will tell you that is not accurate. Each trade package, electrical, site work, each large trade package will be bid out. There has to be at least 3 bidders that are qualified. All of the subcontractors are pre-qualified, which means you don't have anybody walking off the job or people that have overcommitted and the things that unfortunately we're seeing. There's a shortage of tradesmen in the marketplace right now. So you will see open book, transparent pricing, 3 bids per package, just like you would in any other format. And I've mentioned the professional cost estimator. That is an outside service that your architect would have you pay for. When you bring in a construction manager, they're doing your estimating. So that's as part of their services. I can answer any questions. Well, I shouldn't say that. I can do my best to answer any questions you all would have about these methods of delivery. Yes, Frank.
Mention that about the percentages that you can build into the contract. Well,
the
percentages.
Sure. So one of the things that we like about CM at risk is everyone is working toward the common goal. And one of them can be, how can we save money? And so when we have a contingency moving into construction, you all can have it as part of your contract to say, okay, so when we get to the end, there's money left in the contingency. We get 80% of it and the contractor gets 20% of it. And that is an incentive for them to, and again, not to de-scope the project, just to find more efficient ways to do the same thing and provide the same value. And that allows for and that's something you negotiate at the time whenever you bring them on board. So everyone's working toward a common goal of delivering the project at value, but if they find ways of doing it in a more economical fashion, then there can be some leverage and some actual return on that. That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
All right, real quick, before we ask questions about procurement, Lenny, did you want us to break before we ask questions?
No, you can do it afterwards.
All right, let's open the floor for questions. All right.
I have one. Is a third party inspector, required in all of these?
Yes, ma'am. Unfortunately, that is a code requirement.
Oh.
So regardless of how we procure the job, that has to happen, yes.
I have a question. I know obviously we can find qualified people in any of these categories. So which one, in your opinion, do you feel like we can, as a town, get the best deal?
That's an interesting closer, the best deal. I feel like CM at Risk is the best for the pricing as well as the pathway. And I say that because we're working together along the way to realize value. And so you really do end up getting the most for your money in that aspect. So that would be my answer to that.
I think the benefit in that route for us is actually having the architect work for us as well as the construction company work for us. So the town would be in charge of both of those aspects.
And we don't obtain the bids for that. You guys or whoever.
Professional service.
Right.
One of the things I've seen in our transportation industry projects, a lot of these projects, both design build and design bid build, have ended in delays and claims. When I hear of CM at Risk, I believe it mitigates some of those unforeseen challenges. You know, when the problems are in front of you early and nothing's hidden until the end. So I think it's a great way for us to have a transparent process personally that will lead to maybe a reduction in the chance of a claim and unforeseen delays. We'll know the delays ahead of time through that process from my personal experience.
And Ray, to add on to that, I think it reduces the conflict between contractors, the architects, and the client. It's just a smoother run. Right. Absolutely.
Any other questions about procurement?
Other municipalities in the area that are using the construction manager at Risk, any others around?
It's probably 80% of what is in north and south.
Yeah, it's very, very tough. I think once you hit a certain size of job, then it becomes the.
You are here. It's like $5 million is the round number. Yeah, so you're there.
All right, and then do we want to move on to report on proposed funding sources? Is that your report or is that somebody else's?
I hope that's not my report.
Why don't we, thank you for sharing all of the information and answering our questions. Let's take a 2-minute break and then we'll transition Ms. Rhonda to talk about funding sources.
Thank you all for the opportunity.